Welcome Space Cadets to this tutorial series. We're going to be looking at missiles in this particular episode, which is our long-range sort of standoff weapon, the typical sort of thing that we're going to be sort of using a lot in the game. We've just got a big Harkonish frigate sort of coming in on the side through here, which does have concussion missiles armed. It's just moving into range now on this human mining station. So we'll use the mining station and have a look at what damage is done with the missiles when they start to fire. It'll fire very, very soon. Any second now. Should then start to sort of see. Now what we'll see is we'll see a volley of missiles coming in from each broadside. There it goes. It's now sort of moving around, positioning itself, getting ready. Just keep on watching as it comes in. I've got it on very, very slow range so we can see what this actually does do. It's positioning itself to get ready for the attacks. God, it's a good looking game. It's a good looking game. Should be close enough now to start firing very, very soon. Setting itself up. Any second now. Any second. Don't know where it's trying to set itself up from. Hang on, just make sure it does have the yeah, it's got the attack order on. Let's have a look at this one through here. There it goes. This is now, the missiles are now firing. And so there's a volley of missiles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then from the other side as well. And they're both, one's going to miss there. Others are going in. And we'll just watch what actually happens with the damage that actually is done in through this particular element as the missiles start to hit. Now some of them are going to miss. There we go. So we're seeing damage done to the shielding initially. The shielding is now coming back down. We've got some point defense there as well, just sort of trying to hit different things. We're breaking through pretty quickly through the shielding. We're doing a little bit of bypass damage occasionally, which is the odds of what we sort of see through there. Now we're getting shot back at ourselves, but in this instance the shields are now down to 50%. So we're doing damage to the shields initially, like what we saw with the beam weaponry, and then they're just going in. So it's just volley after volley from this frigate going into the actual mining station here. So we'll eventually sort of keep on whittling it down as each volley sort of hits. A lot of these will miss, but most of these ones are going to go in and hit. Notice that we're staying way, way back at very, very long range here, which we'll talk about. The shields are now down. We're now going to, or nearly down, but they're going to start to smash through the actual armor. Just got to wait for another of the, whoa, hang on, just get rid of that. Sorry about that. Right at the wrong possible time. Let's just move that one out of their way. Okay, so another volley coming off the sides and through this side, and then firing back in again. They're trying to use point defense to protect themselves. This should now break through the rest of the shielding, and then we'll do even more damage. So if you compare this to the other videos that we were looking at, we're a lot further back. We're just sitting at maximum range, peppering away. We've now broken through both the shielding, the armor, the whole lot, and we're just doing now damage to the components. And so a lot of the aspects have been sort of damaged on the station itself, and we're now starting to sort of just move in a little bit. Again, we wait for the volleys to come. Here they come from either side, and see how they're seeking. They actually fire out and they seek the actual location. Some of these are a bit wild, but a lot of them do go in. And this is the power of missiles. You've got a lot of them. They go in at high range. Now we're moving in because there's no threat really on this thing. It can no longer, like, we're damaging its capacity to fire back. So some of the weaponry has now been fired. So our ship is automatically moving into a more optimum range to get even more damage done. It's really cool the way it works. Now, a lot of people consider the missiles to be the only weapon you need to use. I don't agree with that. I think there's a few errant missiles that don't quite go where they're supposed to go, but generally now we're sort of getting in very, very close, doing all sorts of damage. In we go. And so we've now closed right in. This thing has got no real hope anymore. There's still a couple of weapons that are actually available, but it really is in the last throws now. Let's just speed up the time. Just go back to normal time, and we can sort of then just watch what they look like at normal time. Again, we have to wait for them to load the missiles in, and then we send another volley out. There they go again. So 8 of them at a time, then straight into the actual mining station, and just ripping through the station, just doing lots and lots of damage there. Just watch as it destroys the rest of them. We've got some point defense weaponry happening in through there. We're taking a bit of damage ourselves, not a hell of a lot. More going in. See, there is something hitting us. Oh, pirates. You get the idea, you get the idea. I was wondering what was going on. So the pirates have come in and actually have saved this one. Our guy's going to actually run away at this point in time. So the pirates actually did the damage back to us, but you got the idea. We're still firing at this thing. We've almost got it. They're keeping to the mission, firing these missiles off as it sort of disappears away from the other bits and pieces. In fact, I think it's still actually doing what it's doing. Yeah, no, it's still actually okay. It's going to stay in the fight even though the pirates are back there. And we're still targeting other things. In fact, we are now hitting this pirate. Anyway, that's beside the point, but you sort of get a bit of a feel for at least what's going on here with the with our ship and the missiles itself. Oh, that was an unpleasant surprise. All right, let's get into it and talk about missiles, what they do, where they're different from the other weapons that we've looked at so far, and why people do like these a lot. And they really do fill a very important role in your fleets and on certain ships. Now, missiles actually are just above kinetic weapons and just below torpedo weapons, which we'll be talking about in the next episode. So these are in through here, and you sort of end up starting with just like basic seeking missiles at tech level 0. Tech level 1 is what we're looking at through here. And these were concussion missiles. We were using medium concussion missiles in this particular instance. And what we can sort of see through here, if we actually have a look at this one, you'll see that the range is identical for the small and the medium, which are the middle and the right-hand columns. The damage is identical, the 12. Everything is identical all the way down until we actually reach the second bottom line, which is the shots per volley. And so the shots per volley, 4 versus 8. And there's half a second between each shot in the volley for the medium, and there's 1 second, so it's double the distance. So they're going at the same rate essentially, but the small has only got half the capacity to fire off the missiles. So a small concussion missile slot at size 19, which is fairly big. So these are actually like in comparison to the other weapons that we've seen so far, this is the biggest of the weapons that we've seen so far. So at 19 for a small is up there. We were looking at, when you compare that, it's almost double the actual space on the ship than what a Maxos blaster is, as an example. So at the same level, so it is actually quite different. Where it actually changes, I guess, away from the Maxos blaster, and maybe we'll go into the and have a look now at the and we'll compare it in the actual designer, the ship designer. Actually, before we actually leave this screen, on the next level, we're tech level 1 over through here. Tech level 2, which is the third column along, has actually now got a few different other missiles. It's got fast missiles, which do 15 damage. Now, just keep a look at this one damage in through here. This is 12 damage. It goes to 15 with these, which are a little bit faster. We've got the improved missiles, which are just essentially the concussion missile version 2. Again, 14 damage as opposed to the 12. But then we've got the heavy missiles, which are the Lance missiles. And these do 38 damage. And we saw this when we were looking at the railguns. We actually saw the importance of going for the larger weapon, for the bigger bang for buck. There's only 2 shots per volley, okay, so it's actually, it doesn't look that great, but the actual damage to the ship is worth a lot, particularly as you go further into the actual game itself. So that is something really, really worth watching and looking at. So anyway, I thought I'd just mention that at tech level 2, there is actually a bigger missile that you may want to consider. It does have a the damage rate, you can see there 2 per second is the actual damage rate over time, but that's not the important thing. When we have a look at this one through here, it's 2.64 damage per second for the medium, but once you start to get aspects of the ships that mitigate damage, then you need to have the higher hitting power, which is why those heavy missiles ultimately are better to use than the smaller one. I hope that that makes sense. I know it's sort of a bit confusing when you're looking at the damage rates. The damage rates are not taking into account the mitigation or the reactive componentry of the ships that they're firing at. Now, there's reactive componentry often when you go up to these higher levels in the shielding, in the armor, and also on the hull. So there's a different range in through that side. Let's have a look at and see what we actually end up getting with the missiles. They're pretty consistent all the way through with a lot of their actual stats. And so let's have a look at the medium, because that is what we've been using on this particular ship. I know that we've been looking at smalls, but the small just does half the number of volleys when it does actually fire. We saw in the actual illustration of what was going on, the 8 coming out from either side of the broadside in this particular instance, where we've got like 2 concussion missiles on either side. But we'll just sit over here with the concussion missiles and talk about each one of them. Now, you'll notice that the actual classification is a standoff weapon. And so also on the left-hand side, like where my mouse is, you'll see it's got WST. This means basically weapon standoff, and so other things will be weapon. This will be close, so weapon close in essentially. Weapon interceptor, so this is point defense. Weapon ion in through this side as well. So they've got different sort of classifications. So a standoff weapon is designed to fire at long range, and so that's really what this is about. Sort of. It's sort of designed that way. Some of these standoff weapons do better actually at short range, but the thing about missiles is that they don't lose their power over distance, because they basically are a missile, and the warhead is the warhead. And so when we have a look at this one, it is the fire type is actually, you'll see there the size of 38, and if we go to the small, it's still 19. So size 19, it's a big weapon. It's often hard to fit these things onto ships. So you've almost got to think what the role of the ship is to then make it into a standoff weapon, like a standoff ship. And so you'll be wanting to actually sort of keep these things at distance. You don't want them going too close to the actual combat. So the whole idea of these ships, in fact, before we do this, what I have done with this one is I've set the attack stance. The default is usually aggressive and then neutral. In this instance, I've made it neutral and cautious, but you can also make it cautious and cautious. And so you saw in the actual illustration again, when I did have it set to neutral and cautious, when it first went into the attack, it actually stayed at maximum range to weaken the mining station. When the mining station became weak, it then went in closer to get better bang for buck at that point in time. And so it went from a cautious stance when it was considered strong to a neutral stance when it was considered weak. So it closed the gap. And this is actually where you use these sorts of things. So it's important if you are going to have like a standoff ship like one of these with the missiles on it, that you actually do consider changing at least the stronger targets to cautious, and possibly either keep this at neutral, which is what we saw when it actually went in, or you can also keep this at cautious as well. It'll still be just as effective. And so what happens with the missiles, when we have a look at this one, the damage at point blank range is 12, and the range is long range at 1800. This is a lot longer than what we've seen. It's not double the range of the other weapons, but it's getting out there. So it's actually a very, very long range. And the damage at maximum range is also 12. So when it hits, it does the same amount of damage. Unlike all the other weapons we've seen so far, the other weapons actually diminish their damage over distance. These don't. So when they hit, they hit. The difference here is, though, that at point blank, we have an accuracy of 88% to hit. At maximum range, we have 77. So it's not that much different. And when you actually have a look at the damage per second, at sort of like at the point blank at 2.64 damage per second, as to maximum range at 2.31, it's not dramatically different. And so that's why you sort of like you can't afford to stay right back and pepper away, because quite often these ships will actually have a much, much higher firing range than what's actually coming up against it. So if it can kite away, so these are great for kiting away from other ships. Plus they're also seeking weapons, you see there at the top line there, it says fire type is seeking, which means that and we saw that in the illustration, they fire out and they target and move into the actual ship itself. Now a percentage of them will sort of lose the track, and that's that 88% or 77%. There will be a portion of them that miss and go off wildly in other directions. They won't hit anything else. They just fire off in another direction. Now you can see there through there at the weapon countermeasures is plus 57%. So it does have a bit of a countermeasures aspect, but nothing like, for example, the beams or even the railguns. If we go to the medium railgun and sort of have a look at the where is it, the actually at the top there, weapon countermeasures. So it's close to the railgun, where the railgun is plus 62. This is 57. The beams themselves, like the Maxos blasters, I've only got a small one through there, but it's actually, the Maxos blaster is a 62. The beams, for example, the Thuon beams are going to be 72. So the concussion missiles are easier to hit with point defense weaponry, is what that's sort of telling us in through there. The what else is there to look at through this side? The speed is slow at 375 per second. We saw that in the example. And it's got a negative 10% armor bypass. Now what that means is that if it's going to hit at 12, 1.2 or basically one damage of that against armor is not going to work. So it's going to have essentially 11 when it hits armor, as opposed to 12 when it hits shields or hull. And so when it hits armor, essentially it does actually have a slight diminished capacity, but not much. So you almost can sort of ignore that, but that is actually a bit of a negative, very slight negative in through there. Energy per shot is the shot to fire the weapon. And so that's all that actually is. And the fire rate is every 32 seconds, it will then fire another volley. And so it takes 4 seconds to fire the volleys. And so then it's got 32 seconds of basically getting ready for the next volley to be fired. That's how that one does work. It does have a capacity to intercept fighters and seeking. It's better against fighters, like doubly as good against fighters as it is against other missiles coming in, but they can be used that way. So they often you'll sort of see as you're coming into like big stations and things to attack them, that your missiles will be being used as point defense against the other missiles that are coming in to actually attack it, which is quite interesting to sort of see it. The intercept range, though, is only 900, so it's fairly close range. And again, it's basically the same energy to actually fire that. So that's the missiles. The missiles are an interesting weapon, and a lot of people love them because they don't diminish in damage over distance, and they can be fired at long range. Now, one little tip with these is, if you need a ship that has to stay at the longest range away from other ships, and I'm thinking of things like aircraft carriers or anything like that that is still a combat ship, what you want to do is you want to put at least just one missile on. It can be a small, and then set it to cautious through here. Cautious for both of these. And what that will then do, if you've got like a small concussion missile on board, it's the same range as a medium in through this side. You may, if you've got like the Lance missiles, they're going to be even bigger range. But what it does is by setting it to cautious, cautious is the longest range from the furthest range weapon that you have on board. So it'll try to stay away from other ships at that range through the course of the battle, which means it'll kite away all the time. And so a carrier, which is there to actually deliver fighters and bombers, put a missile on, set it to cautious up through the top through here, and that way and by doing that, you're going to then keep it away from a lot of the fighting, and the fighters will then go in and do their job while the carrier stays back at maximum missile range. Even though it won't be that effective as a missile ship, it won't go in close to the combat. You don't want them in close to the combat. So you want them sort of staying away while the fighters do the damage. The fighters and bombers do the damage. So that's about it, I think, for this one. This is a fairly simple one because there's not a real lot to talk about. There's, it's a very basic one, a bit like the beams to a degree. There's just that slight armor weakness that it has, very, very slight. I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching. By the way, if you are a Patreon supporter, thank you very much. Or if you've been buying any of the merchandise or any of the games, including this game through my Nexus game store, thank you. And if you do like what I've been doing, please consider liking and subscribing. It certainly does help. I'll catch you next time.